Worldmaker. Entry. After their return, during the evening bonfire, everything seemed normal, but there were moments that surprised Matthew at first and then started to scare him. The behavior of the other members of the group began to become more and more unusual. Emily often talked to absent characters that only she could see. David, normally calm and rational, suddenly exhibited extreme mood swings and behaved in a completely unfamiliar manner. And Sarah, usually calm and attentive, was now restless and jittery. Matthew couldn't help noticing that something disturbing was happening around them. Word. In the beginning was the Word, the cornerstone, brick and trowel that Matthew, the writer, worked on. Why a writer, you may ask? First of all, he is the creator of worlds, and this is the first power of God, granted to him at the very beginning of the book of Genesis. Such superpowers as dropping a plague of frogs, turning people into pillars of salt, or seeing what you are doing under the quilt, even though mom turned off the light when leaving the room, appeared much later. Secondly, duty. A writer sounded much better than being an unskilled worker. When after Matthew's studies, he painfully learned that while food fell on the ancient Israelites from heaven, now in the store had to be bought with money, and all that can fall on us is just a poorly placed shelf. But even something as mundane as shopping, thanks to his imagination, turned into an extraordinary adventure, where an out-of-this-world creature could be hiding behind every shelf. Some aisles contained traps, such as spikes popping out of the walls, and the self-service checkout was a control panel for a spaceship. In addition to places, he was inspired by people. He could not only transplant their characters into his characters, copy events in their 1. biographies, but they were also a source of ideas, often not so much new to him as they could point to one they liked, and in his case he was lost in the crowd of his own. Now the situation has changed. After years of writing as a hobby and then as a hack, Matthew has become one of the top writers in the country, and his prose has been translated into nearly 50 languages. The genre he specialized in was horror, and since it was both his job and his passion, he read and watched everything that came out in the subject. It ended in cramps of embarrassment when he found B-class works, because even a hackneyed theme like a man disappears and comes back as another can be used in an interesting, not generic way. The screenwriter took the money, then started drinking. He perceived this genre as the other side of the coin to science fiction. Both, however, are based on mixing reality and unreality, which some associate with the attack of space robots or the wailing of the Aerosmith leader. But the classics of the genre prove that it is the most natural form to dress even the most crazy and prose philosophical concepts that humanity has been inventing since the Greeks flying in sheets. It is perfect for talking about socio-political issues under its mask, and ultimately it can be hybridized with any of the older literary genres. Lake. But now he was wrestling with the curse of writer's block. Despite his talent and previous successes, lately he has felt that his ideas have become more and more forced and lacking in their former panache. His last book had won critical acclaim, but now, sitting in front of a blank sheet of paper, he felt as lost and unsure as a black man at a Ku Klux Klan meeting. Emily, his wife, noticed his frustration and decided to take action. She knew that sometimes new experiences and a change of environment could bring new inspiration. She organized a trip for Matthew, along with his brother, David, and sister-in-law, Sarah. The four were, too, closely related, sharing a love of literature, travel, and quirks greater and lesser. After David, shown no longer any sign of regret that Matthew would not lend him money to pay off his gambling debt, seeing it as feeding an addiction. Everyone was eagerly awaiting the upcoming adventure and the unknown possibilities that this time together could bring them. For Matthew, it was also an opportunity to sort out some things in the marriage after recent problems. The village they reached was somewhat off the beaten path of civilization and was surrounded by fields painted with various grains, gilded with wheat, silvered with rye. Tufts of forest spread around them, and the hilly surroundings on the horizon added magic and mystery to the place. Their cottage was on an agritourism farm, where peace and quiet reigned above all, accompanied by a delicate odor of manure. The owner, asked by Matthew about interesting local stories, told about a small lake, which supposedly used to sometimes switch people looking at their reflections on the water surface, possibly being in fact drowners. They spent the first days walking, observing wildlife and breathing fresh air. Matthew believed these new experiences would revive his imagination and restore fluidity to his writing. After dinner, brother, sister-in-law and Emily decided to go out for one more walk and find the mysterious lake. Matthew had stood wrong on the previous outing and strained his calf. He decided to pass, assuring him that he would be able to catch up on sightseeing during the trip. He only asked Sarah and David for their phone numbers in case something happened, realizing that for the last few years they had only communicated through social media. Matthew repeated their phone numbers flawlessly a moment later. 3. But how did you do it? They asked. It's simple, he replied. He assigns to each digit an object symbolizing it, and so. 1. Candle. 2. Swan. 3. Handcuffs. 4. Chair. 5. Hook. 6. Cherry. 7. scythe. 8. Snowman. 9. Elephant. Then they should be combined into a sequence, i.e. 231 is a swan trying to burn through the handcuffs that bind him over a candle. Alright, said David hesitantly, but how do you know where to start? I seated you on it, Matthew replied laughing. Fireplace. After their return, during the evening bonfire, everything seemed normal, but there were moments that surprised Matthew at first and then started to scare him. 4. Emily sat on the edge of a bench in the garden, her gaze directed into a space that seemed empty to others. A gentle breeze blew through her hair as she began talking to the invisible figures. So how are you today? She asked gently, directing her words towards the invisible object. Her voice sounded calm and kind. Matthew watched her from a distance, watching this strange conversation. He didn't hear the answer, but he could see Emily nodding her head as if picking up words that didn't exist. Her eyes were full of understanding and compassion. I understand, she murmured softly, trying to catch the content of the conversation he couldn't hear. Her hands were slightly raised, as if she was holding someone's hand. Matthew approached cautiously and sat down next to Emily. He looked at her with concern. Emily, who are you talking to? What's going on? Emily looked at him with a warm smile. It's hard to explain, Matt. But I believe these characters are here for good. They help me understand what we really need in life. Matthew felt lost, but seeing the calmness in Emily's eyes, he decided to believe. He stroked her hand gently and asked, can they help us too? Can we meet them? Emily nodded, pointing to the seat next to her. Sit down, maybe we can talk together. She handed him a mug of house wine. 5. Matthew sat down next to Emily, feeling a little nervous but also curious. He felt the presence of something unusual around him. My name is Matthew, he said, directing his words into space. I'm a writer and I'm trying to find inspiration for my new book. Do you have any advice for me? There was silence for a moment, then he heard a soft whisper in his mind. Listen to your heart, Matthew. Your true power lies in the authenticity of your words. Let your writing speak to the souls of others and give them hope. Matthew was amazed. It was a voice he heard within himself, full of wisdom and warmth. Emily smiled at him, her eyes shining. You see, Matthew, these invisible figures are our guides. They can help us find our true path. Matthew felt a new responsibility placed on his shoulders. He had to believe in this mysterious force and trust that it would lead him to creative inspiration and finding his inner voice. 6. Talking to invisible characters was something unusual for Emily and Matthew. They knew that they could count on their support in their journey through life and in search of their true destinies. David began to show increasingly unstable moods in the last minutes, which began to worry Matthew. Usually calm and rational, David suddenly went through extreme emotions, leaving the rest of the family confused and baffled. David, who had been eating sausage and mustard until then, sat down at the table with a serious expression on his face. His gaze was cloudy, and his facial expression was one of deep melancholy. Trying to reach him emotionally, Matthew began to ask what was going on. David, are you okay? What happened?
Matthew asked, looking at his brother. David looked at him for a moment, then sighed deeply. I don't know, Matt. I feel so down, like I'm carrying the whole world on my shoulders. Everything seems so pointless and difficult. Matthew felt helpless. He didn't know how to help David, but he decided to support him. He tried to talk to him about his feelings, listen to him carefully and offer his support. However, David's moods continued to fluctuate. 7. Suddenly, David started laughing in excitement. His eyes shone and his mouth was wide open as he gestured vigorously. Matt, you have to understand me! Exclaimed David. Everything suddenly fell into place. I have so many great ideas and plans. I can't wait to realize them. Matthew was surprised by the sudden change of mood. He accepted his brother's volatile moods with an open mind, trying to understand that everyone had their own emotional storms. However, these emotional swings began to affect all four. There were times when David was absent and separated, even in the presence of those close to him. Sometimes he reacted with irritation or anger for no apparent reason. Matthew didn't yet know how much these mood swings were tied to a mysterious force that seemed to be manipulating their lives. They all felt that something disturbing was happening around them, and the answers were even more complicated and hidden in the depths of this strange place to which they had gone. But what was most disturbing was Sarah's behavior. Sarah, usually calm and attentive, now began to exhibit disturbing behavior. Her usual confidence and focus gave way to anxiety and jitteriness. Matthew noticed that something disturbing was happening inside her. 8. The once composed Sarah now seemed distracted and thoughtful. She often stared into the distance, her eyes full of concern. Sometimes she would stop suddenly, as if she heard something others couldn't see. Her movements were nervous and her hands trembled slightly. Matthew suspected Sarah was experiencing something unusual. He asked her gently what was going on, but Sarah was withdrawn. She was unable to express her feelings and experiences in a way that others could understand. He took her for a short walk around the neighborhood, and Sarah suddenly stopped, holding on to Matthew's arm. Her eyes were wide open as if she saw something others couldn't. "Matthew, I feel we're being watched. I sense presences, but I can't see anyone," Sarah whispered, sighing heavily. Matthew felt a shiver of anxiety run through his body. Seeing Sarah so terrified, he decided to give her support and a sense of security. He hugged her tightly and promised that together they would overcome this. Sarah's strange behavior became more apparent with each passing minute. She often talked to herself, her dialogue seeming to be directed at absent people. It was something completely incomprehensible to the rest of the family. 9. Matthew suddenly understood everything. Terrified, Matthew began to suspect that his loved ones had been switched by unknown forces. He was convinced that an alien entity or mysterious power was controlling their minds and manipulating their actions. The moment came when he had to take action. He decided to explore the mystery behind these strange events. He decided that at dawn he would go alone to the lake and try to get to the bottom of the problem. Having made sure that the others were still asleep, he slipped out of the house and, despite his aching leg, quickly moved towards the water. About halfway there, he began to hear human laughter from the brush, though he couldn't see the source of it. As he reached the shoreline suddenly, Emily and Sarah came out from behind the trees, their eyes glowing with a strange light that was clearly visible in the dawn. They were his relatives, but something was wrong. Matthew understood that they were doppelgangers, controlled by the same unknown force. Matthew was so absorbed in the unusual sight that he did not notice David running up from the side, who rushed at him, knocked him down and began to hold him under the shallow water. The girls joined in and the three of them only stopped holding him when he stopped moving. "It's all over," said David. "We await the headlines famous writer drowns while swimming alone in lake, illicit substances found in his blood," added Sarah, pulling one of the glowing lenses out of her eye. "We will split the inheritance equally," Emily added. "The poor man thought that I forgave him for cheating and I did not see the correspondence regarding potential divorce from a lawyer on his laptop. He doesn't even know what killed him, and all it took was a little magic to add to his wine, some acting, and then makeup. Then makeup. Then makeup."